The bright glow of Capitol Hill lights spilled into the hearing chamber, where television cameras from every major network zoomed in with surgical precision. The air thrummed with the low hum of whispered speculation and the soft clatter of reporters adjusting their recorders. At the witness table sat Kash Patel, dressed impeccably in a navy suit, his posture confident, his familiar half-smile projecting calm authority. As the former chief of staff to the acting Secretary of Defense, Patel had become one of Donald Trump's most unwavering defenders. Public pressure was nothing new to him. He had sparred with journalists on cable news, endured tough congressional cross-examinations, and weathered more than his share of controversy. But today's hearing felt different. The energy in the room was heavier, sharper, as if every camera lens were a microscope waiting to expose something unseen. Across the polished oak table sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, poised and silent, her papers neatly stacked, her expression unreadable. Though relatively new to Congress, her reputation already preceded her, a calm storm cloaked in precision. A former civil rights attorney with a razor-sharp prosecutorial instinct, Crockett had made a name for herself as a questioner who didn't grandstand, she dissected. Her inquiries weren't for show. They were surgical strikes, calculated and unrelenting. The committee chair's gavel came down sharply, slicing through the noise. The committee will now recognize Representative Jasmine Crockett for her questioning period. All eyes turned toward her. Crockett looked up, locking eyes with Patel. The air thickened. "Mr. Patel," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I only have one question for you today." Patel leaned forward slightly, confident, almost smiling. "I'm happy to answer any question." "Congresswoman." What followed, however, would leave the entire chamber stunned. Crockett's question, short, surgical, and impossible to deflect, landed with the force of a hammer. Patel's confident smile faltered. His lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. The silence that followed was deafening. The once self-assured witness looked shaken, his composure slipping like sand through glass. Within seconds, the hearing room erupted. Journalists scrambled to file breaking reports, aides whispered urgently into phones, and lawmakers leaned in, visibly stunned. A single question had shattered a narrative years in the making. Before we unpack this pivotal exchange, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because this moment didn't just shake Washington. It redefined what accountability looks like under the glare of truth. To understand how we got here, we need to look at who these two figures are and why their collision on Capitol Hill sent shockwaves through the political landscape. Kash. Patel had spent years as one of Trump's most trusted lieutenants, rising from relative obscurity in national security circles to become a key player. During the administration's most volatile months, he served as Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council before assuming the powerful role of Chief of Staff at the Pentagon during the chaotic twilight of the Trump presidency. After leaving office, Patel became a conservative media star. His book, Government Gangsters, cast him as a truth-teller fighting a corrupt establishment, earning him hero status within MAGA circles. He hosted podcasts, wrote columns, and was widely rumored to be in line for a top intelligence post should Trump reclaim the White House. His calm demeanor and insider access made him appear untouchable. Facing him was Jasmine Crockett, a complete counterpoint, grounded, principled, and methodical. A Texas congresswoman, former civil rights lawyer, and lifelong advocate for voting rights and police reform, Crockett had built her career from the grassroots up. Her style was factual, unsparing, and immune to bluster. She didn't seek sound bites. She sought contradictions. This particular hearing carried immense weight. The committee was investigating decisions made during the final days of the previous administration. Decisions tied to national security, classified intelligence, and the peaceful transfer of power. Patel had long claimed that he held key evidence vindicating Trump's team, but for the first time, he was facing someone with no allegiance to his story, only to the truth. Behind the scenes, Crockett's team had prepared meticulously. They sifted through years of Patel's statements, media appearances, and testimony, uncovering a subtle but critical inconsistency buried deep within his own words. When the cameras began rolling that morning, every moment had been calibrated for impact. The room fell quiet as Crockett began her questioning. "Thank you for appearing before us today, Mr. Patel," she said evenly. "As you're aware, this committee is reviewing actions taken in the final months of the last administration, specifically regarding national security and the transition of classified information." Patel nodded, his expression confident. "I'm here to be transparent, Congresswoman. I've always told the truth." The first few exchanges were predictable. Patel outlined his duties, the chain of command, his access to high-level meetings. His responses came smooth, rehearsed, even charismatic. Then Crockett leaned forward slightly. "In your memoir, you wrote that you had unparalleled access to classified material during the transition. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Patel said proudly. "My position granted me access to the highest levels of information. I can speak with complete authority on these matters." Crockett nodded, flipping a page in her notes. "And in multiple interviews, you claim to have personally attended several high-level meetings about the transfer of classified intelligence to the incoming administration." "True. Absolutely," Patel answered. For a brief moment, it seemed routine. Then came the pivot. "Mr. Patel," Crockett said, her tone sharpening just slightly. "Let's revisit your Fox News interview from March 15th of last year. Are you familiar with that appearance?" Patel hesitated just for an instant. "I've done quite a few interviews, Congresswoman, but yes, I recall that one." Crockett nodded to her aide. A large screen flickered to life. Patel's voice filled the chamber. "I personally ensured that every proper protocol was followed in handling sensitive materials. When the clip ended," Crockett turned back toward him. "Do you stand by that statement?" "Absolutely," he replied quickly. "Everything was done by the book." Crockett waited a beat. "Interesting," she said evenly. "Because I also have your appearance on the America First podcast from April 30th. The second clip played. Patel's tone in that one was casual, offhand. We had to do what was necessary to protect certain information, even if that meant working around standard procedures." A murmur rippled through the hearing room. Crockett's expression didn't change. "Mr. Patel, those two statements don't match. In one, you claim every rule was followed. In the other, you acknowledge bending them. Which one should this committee believe?" "You're taking that podcast comment out of context," Patel said quickly, his voice a touch defensive. "I was referring to bureaucratic red tape, not security procedures." "I see," Crockett replied coolly. "Let's look at your timeline, then." She adjusted her glasses, scanning her notes. "Records indicate that on January 12th, you attended a meeting about classified document handling at the Pentagon. Correct?" "Yes." "And that meeting occurred in the secure briefing room?" "That's right." Crockett looked up. "Yet the White House visitor logs show you were in a meeting there at precisely the same time. How could you have been in two places at once, Mr. Patel?" A stunned silence filled the room. Patel shifted, the confidence draining from his voice. "There must be an error in the records," he muttered. "I'd have to check my personal calendar." "Please do," Crockett replied smoothly. "Now, your book mentions that you personally reviewed classified intelligence on January 15th. Were those reviews conducted at the Pentagon?" "Some were, yes. Others took place at different secure facilities. Can you identify those other facilities?" "For national security reasons, I can't discuss those locations in an open hearing." Crockett tilted her head. "That's interesting. Because you've mentioned those same facilities by name in Chapter 6 of your book, and in at least 3 separate podcast interviews." The shift was instant. The air in the hearing room changed, from routine oversight to political spectacle. Lawmakers who had been half listening now sat upright. Journalists leaned forward, pens racing. Crockett's calm precision had begun dismantling the witness piece by piece. "Mr. Patel," she continued evenly, "you testified under oath before this committee last year that you played no direct role in discussions about withholding intelligence briefings from the incoming administration. Do you still stand by that statement?" "I do," Patel said, trying to steady himself. Crockett signaled to her aide. A new document illuminated the screen, an email dated January 13th, from Patel's own government account titled Transition Briefing Modifications. Her voice remained calm, almost courteous. This message reads, and I quote, "Per our discussion, I've reviewed the transition briefing materials and identified several sections that should be withheld or modified before sharing with the incoming team." She looked up slowly. "Can you explain how that aligns with your sworn testimony, Mr. Patel?" The silence that followed was so complete that even the cameras seemed to pause. The color drained from Patel's face. Theon's buzzing room had gone silent. "I'd need to review the full email chain to provide proper context," Patel replied, his tone less steady. "Of course," Crockett said calmly. "We have the full exchange here." What followed was 15 minutes of tense exchanges that left the room hanging on every word. With each question, Crockett revealed contradiction after contradiction between Patel's sworn statements and his book. Between his TV interviews and government records, between his public claims and private emails obtained by the committee, lawmakers from both sides watched in disbelief as Crockett's quiet, precise questioning dismantled Patel's carefully maintained image. She never raised her voice or showed irritation. Instead, she relied on her prosecutor's discipline, laying out each fact, each inconsistency, one step at a time. Patel's confidence crumbled. He accused others of misquing him, insisted that parts of his book were ghostwritten, and complained that his remarks were taken out of context. Several times he leaned over to whisper to his attorney. The tension in the room was now thick enough to feel. Everyone could tell Crockett was leading to something monumental, a final question that Patel would not be able to sidestep. The hearing had shifted from a normal inquiry into a political turning point. Even members who usually spent these sessions on their laptops were now riveted, realizing they were witnessing a defining moment. Crockett calmly straightened her papers, then looked up. Patel's earlier composure was gone. His voice had weakened after 30 minutes of being pinned by his own contradictions. "Mr. Patel," Crockett said steadily, "I'd like to turn to one final topic." Patel nodded stiffly. "Of course, Congresswoman, in your book," Crockett continued, "you wrote extensively about January 6th, stating that you were, quote, in constant communication with the White House throughout the day, advising on security responses. Is that accurate?" "Yes, that's correct," Patel replied, sounding relieved to be on familiar ground. "And on page 247, you describe a specific phone call from the White House at 2:24 p.m. requesting your input on National Guard deployment. You even detail your recommendations in the next section. Do you stand by that account?" "I do," Patel said firmly. "That call was critical to what happened that day." Crockett nodded slightly. "And you've repeated this account in several interviews, including on Newsmax, where you said the call lasted about 7 minutes and involved discussions of specific deployment sites around the Capitol. Is that also correct?" "Yes," Patel said, his voice tightening. "Those details are accurate to the best of my memory." The entire room had gone silent. No one moved. No papers rustled. Everyone could feel that something major was coming. "Mr. Patel," Crockett said, her tone still calm but unmistakably firm, "this committee has obtained the full White House call logs for January 6th. We've also reviewed your personal phone records from that day, collected through lawful channels." For the first time, Patel's expression shifted from confidence to genuine alarm. He leaned over and whispered something quickly to his lawyer, who frowned. In addition, Crockett continued, "We've interviewed multiple White House staff members who were present that day and reviewed their contemporaneous notes." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the chamber. Patel's hand twitched toward his glass of water, but he hesitated before touching it. "Mr. Patel," Crockett said, locking eyes with him, "can you explain why there is no record whatsoever of a phone call between you and the White House at 2:24 p.m.? on January 6th or at any time between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. Despite your repeated claims under oath and in your own published book that this occurred, the question hung in the air like a thunderclap. The silence that followed was absolute. Patel stared at Crockett, his lips parting but no words coming out. He finally reached for his glass of water with a trembling hand and took a long drink. The room stayed frozen. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. Patel's attorney leaned close and whispered urgently in his ear, but Patel didn't seem to register the words. "I believe," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I believe the call may have come through on a secure line not reflected in those records." Mr. Patel Crockett replied immediately. Her tone is still calm but razor sharp. "Our committee has already reviewed all secure line logs from both the Pentagon and the White House for that day. There's no record of any communication between you and anyone in the White House during that 3-hour window." She slid a document across the table toward him. "This is the complete communication record compiled from multiple verified sources. Your name does not appear anywhere during the time you claim to have given essential security guidance." Patel stared at the document in disbelief. The blood drained from his face as he glanced helplessly at his attorney, who looked equally shaken. Furthermore, Crockett continued evenly, "We have sworn statements from every individual present in the White House crisis room during that time frame. Not a single one recalls speaking with you. None mention your input on National Guard deployment despite your repeated claims that you played a critical advisory role." She paused deliberately, letting the weight of her words ripple through the room. "So my question, Mr. Patel, is simple," she said. "Did you fabricate your role in these key January 6th decisions to sell books and boost your political reputation? Or is there another explanation for why not a single piece of credible evidence supports your account?" The silence that followed was absolute. Lawmakers from both parties stared in shock. Reporters frantically typed notes, their phones buzzing with breaking alerts. Camera operators zoomed in tight on Patel's face, capturing the expression that would soon be seen across millions of screens. Kash Patel, once the unflappable insider who thrived under pressure, now looked completely trapped. The question couldn't be dodged or reframed. It cut straight through to the core of his credibility, exposing the foundation of the story he had used to build his post-government career. Patel stammered, looking desperately at this law. "I may have conflated some of the events from that day with later discussions." "Conflated?" Crockett repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's quite a word to use. Let's be clear, your book doesn't contain vague recollections. You describe this call in vivid, minute detail. You wrote about the voice of the caller, your exact words, and the tone of the conversation. Those aren't general memories, Mr. Patel. They're specific, deliberate claims about your role in one of the most critical national security events in recent history." She leaned slightly forward. "So I'll ask again. Are you now testifying under oath that the detailed account you published was fiction?" A wave of murmurs is spread through the committee room. The chairman banged the gavel, calling for order. "Patel's attorney," whispered frantically in his ear. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The moment was irreversible. Either Patel had fabricated his role entirely, or the mountain of documented evidence before the committee was somehow false, and Noon in the room believed that dot in that instant. The image Patel had carefully built over years, the confident insider, the patriot with special knowledge of that fateful day, collapsed in front of the nation, and all it took was one devastatingly direct question from a freshman congresswoman who had done her homework. Within minutes, the exchange exploded online. Clips of Crockett's final question and Patel's stunned silence flooded social media. Hashtags like "Crockett destroys" and "Tag the call never happened" trended nationwide. News outlets interrupted programming to replay the viral moment again and again, a moment that would reshape both of their political legacies. Patel's attempts to recover only made things worse. After a quick huddle with his attorney, he tried to claim the call may have occurred on a personal line. Crockett instantly countered, producing his full personal phone records showing no such call. Heathen shifted tactics, suggesting the timing might have been off by a few hours. But Crockett calmly presented sworn statements from his own staff confirming his exact whereabouts throughout the day, none of which matched his published story. The end of the hearing. Political analysts across the spectrum agreed that they had witnessed a rare moment of authenticity in Washington, one where a polished narrative shattered under the weight of hard evidence outside the hearing room. Reporters swarmed Representative Crockett as she made her way down the marble corridor. "Congresswoman, did you expect Patel to be unable to answer your question?" one journalist shouted. Crockett paused briefly before replying. "This wasn't about expecting anything," she said. "It was about establishing facts. The American people deserve the truth about January 6th, not stories crafted to sell books or score political points." Another reporter called out. "How long did you prepare that line of questioning?" "My team's been tracking inconsistencies in Mr. Patel's accounts for months," Crockett explained. "What you saw today wasn't a gotcha moment. It was the product of months of investigation across thousands of pages of documents, call logs, and witness statements." As Crockett continued toward her office, maintaining her steady composure, Patel slipped quietly out a side door, avoiding the cameras and the barrage of questions waiting for him outside. That evening, Patel's planned appearance on Fox News was quietly canceled without explanation. His publisher released a short statement saying they were reviewing concerns about the accuracy of certain claims in his memoir. By nightfall, the political atmosphere had already begun to shift. Conservative outlets that once booked Patel as a national security expert suddenly turned their attention elsewhere. Several Republican lawmakers who had previously quoted Patel's version of January 6th scrambled to distance themselves. "I relied on what I believe to be first-hand information," one congressman told a local reporter. "If there are doubts about those accounts, Mr. Patel needs to clarify them himself." Within 2 days, major newspapers published deep-dive investigations into Patel's public claims, uncovering even more inconsistencies between his statements and verified records. The credibility he'd carefully built over years of positioning himself as an insider began to collapse almost overnight for Representative Crockett. However, the hearing became a defining moment. Morning shows requested interviews. Legal scholars praised her methodical questioning style. Commentators across social media, especially younger audiences on TikTok and Instagram, hailed her as a new kind of lawmaker, one who prioritized evidence over performance. What Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated wasn't just sharp questioning, a former federal prosecutor said on CNN. It was a model example of how congressional oversight should function. No theatrics, no speeches disguised as questions, just facts, logic, and precision. She built her case step by step and then asked the one question that couldn't be dodged. The impact reached far beyond the two individuals involved. For years, Washington had rewarded a particular style of political communication, bold claims on friendly networks, dramatic memoirs filled with supposed insider details, and constant self-promotion. As the one person who truly knew what happened, Patel had mastered that formula, but Crockett's calm, evidence-driven dismantling of it signaled a major cultural shift. Her approach marked a return to something politics had been losing: accountability grounded in verifiable truth. In the weeks after the hearing, several publishers reportedly began enforcing stricter fact-checking standards for political books, especially those making claims about national security or confidential evidence. The hearing also reshaped how Americans understood January 6th itself. Patel's elaborate descriptions of behind-the-scenes security discussions had influenced public narratives, suggesting certain officials acted heroically but were hindered by others. Once his claims were discredited, journalists and historians re-examined those stories, uncovering a clearer, more accurate timeline of the day's failures. 3 months later, Patel's publisher formally recalled his memoir, citing serious questions about factual accuracy. His television bookings dried up, and former allies quietly distanced themselves. The public image of Kash Patel, national security insider, crumbled completely, undone by one precise question he couldn't answer. Meanwhile, Crockett's rise continued. Her performance wasn't flashy. It was disciplined. In an age of viral outrage clips and shouting matches, she stood out for her quiet power, her ability to make facts, not volume, do the talking. Other lawmakers began to emulate her approach, referring to it as the Crockett method. Months of preparation, relentless fact-finding, and a final question so clear and direct that the truth became impossible to hide. Perhaps the most powerful outcome was not political, but cultural. The hearing reminded Americans of something simple yet profound. Facts still matter, evidence still matters. And when presented clearly, truth still cuts through the noise of spin, performance, and partisanship. In the end, the clash between Crockett and Patel was never just about two public figures or even about January 6th alone. It symbolized a deeper battle over how political discourse operates in America. One side depends on storytelling, self-promotion, and loyal media ecosystems. The other side leans on proof process and the courage to confront falsehoods with facts. In that hearing room with one undeniable question. The difference between those two approaches became unmistakably clear. And as political analysts continue to revisit that exchange, one truth stands firm: Washington will never operate quite the same way again. A new bar has been set, one demanding that public claims must be backed by real evidence and that anyone who invents their role in history will eventually face the question they cannot answer. If you found this breakdown of political accountability, fact-based oversight, and leadership under pressure insightful, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. The ongoing fight for truth in American politics is far from over, and will continue bringing you every pivotal moment that defines it. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our deep dive analyses of Washington's most powerful confrontations and turning points.